crescita.
La crescita.
Wachstum. 成長戦略の growth.
Croissance.
The end of growth has already come. We will not see again anywhere, certainly not in the West, the kind of growth, physical growth in prosperity, in food production and so forth, which we saw, let's say, in the 80s and the 90s. Those days are just gone.
Growth will not return, for the main reason, as humorously explained by leading American economist Kenneth Boulding, that anyone who believes in infinite growth on a physically finite planet is either crazy or an economist.
Just as a rather bizarre and peculiar example, we asked the question, what would happen if a humble hamster didn't stop growing? A hamster doubles its weight each week up to the age of about 6 to 8 weeks. If it didn't stop at that point and kept on doubling, at 1 year old, you'd be looking at a 9 billion ton hamster that in a single day could eat global maize production for a year.
Especially for Western economies, growth is becoming much more difficult because of the convergence of 3 factors. One is more expensive oil. The second is increasing cost of environmental impacts from industrial processes, principally climate change. And the third is an over-reliance on debt, which has been used to stimulate growth for the past several decades.
I firmly believe that if you look around the world today and asked, for example, can we imagine a better financial system? Can we imagine a better energy system? Can we imagine a better food system? Can we imagine a better transport system? All around us, there are live and practical examples of ways to do things better. Our challenge is to bring them together and put them under the nose, thrust them under the noses of politicians and say, why not? It's there. Why don't we have something better? Because it's out there.
I studied politics.
I studied French.
I studied political science and geography.
I actually studied economics. Yeah.
And I practiced investment law, so I advised large hedge funds and private equity funds.
In North America, they're known as career shifters. They were all in higher education for several years and then worked in relatively high-paid jobs before radically reconverting. This is the case for Ran, who previously worked on the New York Stock Exchange, and for Phil, who used to be an architect. In 2011, they created Fresh City Farms, an urban farming cooperative that produces organic vegetables in the suburbs of Toronto. With its 25 members, Fresh City Farms is the embodiment of a vast planet-wide movement of people who have understood the urgent need to change our economic paradigm here and now.
City farming is one of the most important movements of our times. As it turns out, we live on one Earth, and we only have one Earth. We haven't found another one. I think at the basic level is to live in a way that future generations can have a full life as well. The threats are very real. The solutions are all there. Like, we don't need some magic new technology to save us. It's all there. There's nothing that we have to create from new. It's a human problem at the end of the day. It's not a technological problem. I mean, less greenhouse gas emissions, less carbon, less pesticides, more money goes to the local economy. Farming done right is really emblematic of how the economy done right should look.
The kind of growth that we saw during the 20th century is over. That kind of growth was historically unique. It had never happened before in world history. There had been moments of economic expansion, but nothing like what we saw during the 20th century. And of course, that was largely because we had so much cheap energy. The era of truly cheap energy is definitely over. People are understanding, they're seeing these things happen, they're understanding the implications, and they're taking action in their own lives, very sensible action.
You know, we can only rely so much on strawberries that come from California in the middle of winter and, you know, fossil fuels and all those things.
It takes a lot of energy to grow food industrially, and we may not have those energy sources in the future, so it's good to diversify.
Our current food production system is overwhelmingly dependent on fossil fuels, whether it's fuel for tractors or pesticides and herbicides made out of fossil fuels, or nitrogen fertilizers, usually made out of natural gas. For every calorie of food that's produced by our current agricultural system, 7 calories of fossil fuel energy are input into the process.
60% of the fruit and vegetables consumed in the Toronto conglomeration, with its 6 million inhabitants, are imported from the United States and Mexico. On average, each food item travels 4,000 kilometers before reaching the consumer's plate. The city's food autonomy is estimated at a mere 3 days. One study published by the University of Toronto shows that urban farming could cover up to 30% of the city's needs in fruit, vegetables, and poultry.
The Toronto Food Policy Council is advocating for increased city support for urban agriculture. Urban agriculture supports a number of key policy objectives supported by the city, including strong neighborhoods, economic development, environmental sustainability, and health-focused food system.
In 1991, the municipality created the Toronto Food Policy Council to develop a food strategy plan in which urban agriculture played a key role. Today, the city has 4,500 private vegetable gardens and 120 community gardens located in municipal parks. This proactive policy makes Toronto one of the North American capitals of the movement for sustainable food.
If all your food is coming from the 4 corners of the world, and virtually none of it or very little of it is produced locally, then you are dependent on a whole set of players out there that is very, very high risk. And that's why you're seeing this massive global movement of urban agriculture folks who appreciate that, have internalized it, and are trying all these little experiments all over the place as to how we can renovate this system that is going to sooner or later collapse.
There's been a lot of discussion over the past decade about the question of peak oil, whether the rate of world oil production will reach its maximum and begin to decline sooner or later. Everyone knows that it's going to happen because oil is a finite resource. There are some who say that either this peak is happening now or it will happen within the next few years.
What matters is when production of oil diverges from demand for oil. That's where the shock comes. So this, more than anything, should be the biggest call to arms about the need to deeply re-engineer both our lifestyles, how we run our economies, and to get off the fossil fuel dependency that has been fostered.
All produce from Fresh City Farms is sold in short circuits, either at markets or in baskets, which are delivered by bicycle to consumer associations, pickup points, or people's homes. Every week, the cooperative prepares more than 500 baskets. Its produce costs 20% less than supermarket produce.
We have almost zero waste. We know our box numbers by Monday, then we know exactly how much to harvest, so we can really optimize how we deliver, and that's important both for cost but also for energy. So there's, the routes are all very fuel efficient. We have a team we're working with, they're a group of farmers and professionals who are helping us really create a framework for measuring our environmental impact. So whether it's carbon dioxide emissions, biodiversity, our educational impact in the community. So it's sort of embedded into what we're trying to do.
Urban production is a kind of a form of post-growth production. In other words, we're assuming that we need to rely less on the traditional markets to acquire food. there is this ongoing question about the failure of our economic model to incorporate what are generally referred to as externalized costs. These are costs that nobody is really paying right now. And urban farmers essentially are internalizing those costs. They're reducing pollution, for example. They're producing often higher quality food. And so in that sense, they struggle to define performance within an economic model that doesn't acknowledge all the values they produce.
What was the last one that had a lettuce? And do your former colleagues from Wall Street in New York know that you are packaging and growing food in Toronto now?
Yeah, they think it's crazy. Yeah, because it's, I mean, the firm I worked with did some of the biggest hedge fund and private equity work. So, you'd work with billions and millions of dollars. It's a big change. It's a big change. I'm hoping we're in a period of transition. I think my generation, we see it more and more. I think the financial crisis shook a lot of people out of their lethargy because they realized that you can't eat money and you can't, it doesn't make you feel better when you go home at night.
Ran and his wife Melanie met at law school. Today, she works as a legal expert in a humanitarian organization and is fully supportive of her husband, even though he earns a lot less money than before. The couple have reduced their level of consumption and denounce the more obsession that is threatening the future of the planet and their little girl.
I mean, we're facing huge problems. It's not clear what the future is going to be. I mean, environmentally, socially, whether Earth can support us in the way we're living right now. The question is whether we can sort of change the way we live in time. I think people could be happier than they are right now, consuming much less and consuming much better. Not to believe that consumerism in and of itself, or at least better consumption choices, will change the world in and of itself. Like, I always see it as a precursor to changing politics. So sure, eat organic and eat local, that's important on an individual level, but in order to create systemic change, the politics have to be there.
What would make a huge difference is if those 1,000 flowers blooming at the local community level could be encouraged by action at the national and international level. Then, with a different framework, you could scale up and scale out all these little initiatives, and you'd start to see change happening at a speed and scale that is necessary.
Welcome, and thank you very much for coming this afternoon to the Molino Blanco Market Garden. We're convinced that the solidarity economy encourages the direct link between consumer and producer, which supports food sovereignty. We're accompanied by Ida, who is the president of the Civilian Associations Network of the City of Rosario Market Gardens.
Here in the city, us market garden families don't need much money, but healthy seeds. Here with 4 hectares, 20 families and 20 young people working in the market garden, we're happy. We eat healthily and we make a living from our work. Thank you for coming. I'd like my colleagues to join me now, as I'm not really used to this. Ana, Teresa, Nelly, Pinto.
With a population of 1 million, Rosario is one of the world capitals of urban agriculture. Awarded by the United Nations, the city boasts over 300 professional market gardeners on 22 hectares of municipal land. About 100 young people are in training. The outstanding program was set up at the very beginning of the 21st century, at the time of the major economic crisis that plunged